I'm deeply interested in this issue of how we engage with climate change from a psychological point of view. I'm a social researcher, is what I do, but I have been talking with a lot of psychologists about this. There's only really 2 books on this, which I think in itself says something. And mine is one of them um, on why it is that we don't accept climate change, or why it's been so hard for us. And I think also that question that you are asking, I think it also pertains to that. Why is it maybe that the wider Buddhist community has not been engaged with it? But there's no issue of blame or judgment on that, because actually humanity as a whole has been very poorly connected with it. There are a lot of reasons. In my book, I interviewed some of the world's top psychologists, cognitive psychologists about this issue. And I'm not going to go into these in detail, but I can discuss with you as we go on. Climate change, it seems, there isn't any individual thing which makes it hard for us to deal with. It's a combination of qualities. Unfortunately, it's a very good lineup. I interviewed Daniel Kahneman, who died recently, who was really one of the key figures in cognitive psychology. And he said to me, the problem with climate change is that it is all of the things we're bad at put together. So we're not good at things which are in the future. We like things which are now. We like things which have a history, but we already understand. It's unprecedented. So we're not in any way prepared for it. It's something which feels far away, but we also make it far away. We say, this is a big problem for the future. I've done hundreds of hours in focus groups listening to people, and they say, that's a big problem for, my grandchildren, future generations, but I will be dead and gone before that happens. Sorry, no. Actually, that attitude has shifted now. People can really see now that it's happening. It involves cost. We don't like cost. We like benefits. We try and avoid cost. I usually put in my tax returns about 10 minutes to midnight. It's morally incoherent. We find it very hard to deal with things where there isn't a straight sense of somebody does this with the intention to cause harm to this person. But this is really complex. Nobody intends to cause climate change. The oil companies don't intend to. It's a kind of collateral damage from their business. But they don't say, I'm going to change the world's climate. Donald Trump doesn't say, I'm going to create wildfires and storms. None of us do. Most of the activities that create climate change originate in acts of love, of caring for people, of looking after our families, of having a holiday to spend time with our friends and family, just living, just surviving. But that is very hard for us to deal with. And that's why people feel very blamed when we say, you are the problem. They go, well, I'm just living. This is very challenging. There is a problem, this final point here, that as humans, we make sense of the world through the construction of narratives. This is very much a core of my work in over the last 20 years, of how do we find stories and narratives around climate change that work. Typically, stories function when there is a sense of a hero figure, an enemy, a person who poses a particular challenge, that there is a struggle, but often there is someone from outside who comes and helps us in that struggle through which we have a resolution. And I'm well aware that in your own scripture too, there's that kind of formulation is very often there. Now we have a problem with climate change, but it does not have an enemy. It does not have a distinct figure outside. On the way up here this morning with Paul, I was giving the example I often do as a thought experiment of saying, imagine that CIA drones found that North Korea was pumping gases into the atmosphere that was going to destroy wheat production in the Midwest of the US. Same thing as climate change, utterly different moral narrative construction. And this lack of an enemy is a real challenge for how we make sense of this. And so we tend to find enemies. We tend to project enemies into this story. That is in itself a danger. Because moving forward, there will be a lot of blame going around. Who is responsible for this mess? And there's big dangers of that. And I think also this issue of social silence. Maybe this has also been an issue in your own community. We do not talk about climate change. We still don't talk about it. We don't talk about it with our friends, with our families, and our social groups. That is changing, but far, far too slowly. A lot of my work has been about for silence. And before you can break the silence, you have to name the silence. In this book, I interviewed one of the world's leading experts on social silence. And it's a very hard thing to study because you are studying something that isn't there. You know it's not there, by the way. I said, well, how on earth do you know that there is a silence if you can't find the silence? He said, you know the silence because there's a force field around it. And when you start to go into it, you bounce back out. But it is not something you don't talk about because it's not interesting or not relevant, something you don't talk about because there is a set of rules saying we cannot talk about this. And as someone who speaks all the time with strangers, with people I meet about climate change, I know that force field very well. You go in, you start talking about climate change, and immediately the conversation goes somewhere else. It bounces out. And that is the force field of social silence. But the first step is we have to say there is a silence and we need to challenge it. Now, my work now is on a new book, which is saying what's going to happen in 2050. We've already heard from Aaron about some of the sense of where we're going down the line. I will say, and I will share with you the reality, which is we are not going to hit those targets. The story we hear all of the time is, and every year they have these international meetings where they say, where the story comes out and they say, well, it's not looking good, we're not doing well, there are some signs, some positive signs, we're going to have a lot more commitment and work a lot harder. It is still possible, but we're really going to have to do a lot. That is not true. The truth is we will not make the target, we will not make net zero, we will not achieve 1.5, I don't think we'll achieve 2. I'm afraid all of the indications are, I think we need to be real and honest with that. 2050, so much up till now has been about anticipation, speculation, like, are we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? Can we negotiate a settlement on this? Negotiation, by the way, one of the stages that people go through when they are dealing, for example, with terminal illnesses, a sense of negotiating with it. Can I wangle, can I wriggle my way with this? I'm going to come back to this point. 2050 and mid-century, I'm thinking is a point where we'll be beyond that. And that is where we're going to need your help. We're going to need degrees of acceptance. Acceptance is going to have to be key at that point. We're going to be in a situation where we can no longer pretend, oh, if we just work a bit harder, there's still a bit of time left. I've been working on this for 20 years. Right? 20 years ago, yes. But now, no. And in 20 years' time, definitely not. And right now, we're in a very peculiar moment in human history where governments keep pushing it down the line. It's unbelievable to say we're going to open a new oil field, but we can still make our targets. For heaven's sake. This is a very momentary, transitory stage in human history where we are still holding on to the pretense. And if we all tell each other that mistruth, that distortion, we hope we can believe it. Well, we won't by then. So what's going to happen? And that's what I'd like to explore with you. When we have this, of course, Extinction Rebellion, tell the truth. I love this, just tell the truth. We need to tell the truth, and the truth is not good. There's going to be there's going to be a great deal of dukkha in the widest sense too. Not just the direct pain and suffering of climate change, but the anxiety and the stress, the loss of meaning, the loss of identity, the sense of failure. How are people, say, of my age going to deal with the younger people saying, what did you do? How did you create this situation? Who is responsible? This issue of triage, as I'm sure you know, like triage, this sense actually coming from medicine, particularly from military medicine. I can save this person's life or this person's life, but not both of them. That is going to be happening on a planetary scale. Whose lives do we save and who do we lose? What species do we save? What do we lose? What landscape do we save? What culture do we save? And those decisions will be very hard and based on who holds power. And I think there's going to be this issue of death. I'm going to come to death now because I think it's absolutely core to the issue, but also maybe what you can bring to it and deal with it. Mortality, the fear of mortality and the awareness of it is absolutely threaded through our attitudes to climate change and our responses to it. The way we have responded to climate change, well, my hypothesis, and by the way, I've spoken to people like Professor Daniel Kahneman, like Bill McKibben, one of the leading figures on climate change, people across the board, all of them, the people who have worked on this issue for decades, all feel the same way. But there is something about the way we respond to climate change that is like the way that we respond to the fear of our own death. And my own view is that it has fallen, it has fallen into the same set of avoidance and denial strategies. That is the primary reason why we find it so hard to deal with. This is also the sense of nihilism. This is an extinction, I think, an extremely misjudged Extinction Rebellion protest that involved people with nooses standing on blocks of ice. I mean, obviously they didn't see it through, but this kind of language, by the way, this language of mortality and climate changes appears again and again and again. Roy Scanton, a very interesting article, by the way, I recommend on living, a man who himself serving in the army in Iraq, facing his own mortality. Civilization is already dead, and we need to face that. And that is hard and challenging. There's an immense tension in the climate change discussion between positivity and negativity. The argument of the hopers is that if we say things like this, that we can't do anything. I don't agree. But we have to believe that we can still make the targets, we can still get through, and that is our only chance of doing it. Again, I think it's more complex and difficult than that. This from, you've been hearing from Aaron about the IPCC. This language about terminal illnesses, I think, is powerful. And for my new book and for my research, I've been looking in a lot of detail at how people psychologically respond to notification of a terminal illness and what it does to them and their view of the world. And I think this is directly transferable to views on climate change. I don't know if within your practice you're familiar with this gentleman who comes from the Zen practice, but I think there is a risk of this. I think that there is a risk of not taking up the moral challenge. And by the way, not just with Buddhism, but I think across the board. There is a growing sense of nihilism and a sense of, oh, well, what's the point? Live for today, never mind. And you know, well, I guess that language that talks about humans as a disease, this comes from my own world, the environmental community. It's like, well, we're just a disease, we're a virus. It's actually quite good if we get wiped out. I utterly disagree with that. Searches for the phrase human extinction, for example, have exploded. I mean, not searches, these are actually references to human extinction in books. There's an entire department, an entire institute in Oxford, where I come from, dedicated to extinction studies. It's a very peculiar moment in human history, and I think we need to utterly resolutely resist the language which encourages and prepares us for the sense that we might ourselves become extinct. So what's happening with the death language? I think there will be, in a mortality sense, I think we need to prepare ourselves for the fact that we will ourselves feel physically at threat. And there will be a lot of people will die as a direct impact of climate change. But I think more the points I'm saying, I think there's a way that this issue mimics death in the way that it looks and feels, the sense of loss of not just ourselves, but our entire world. And remember, we've heard from Aaron, for example, about the biological extinctions, but the whole sense of identity, our identity is invested in our environment. In France, interestingly, some of the strongest motivation on climate change has been from the loss of culture, the sense that particular wines, particular foods are invested in particular places. This is powerful. Our opponents also use the language of life and death. Margaret Thatcher gave a very, no, actually Margaret Thatcher isn't an opponent of action on climate change, interestingly. But people on the right often talk about how they want life and how people talking about climate change are a death cult. This language. So this tension is very strong out there. I have been talking a lot with the people who specialize in something called terror management theory, TMT. The theory says that when people are exposed to information about mortality, especially their own mortality, experimentally we find that they strengthen their tendency towards investing in their own identity, in their own culture, often towards degrees of extremism, judgmentalism, and a lack of acceptance of others. But there's a whole set of things which connections with mortality trigger in people, which make them more drawn towards, for example, political extremism. This has been very well tested, and I think is very powerful. And all of these avoidance mechanisms for not thinking about it, denial, distraction, anger, being drawn into authoritarianism, a kind of a fantasy hope. There are so many areas within which your work and within which the Buddhist world can inform this discussion once we start saying climate change is not just about physical threat, it is about this entire mental conception of mortality and how we cope with it. Time will be affected too. This is seconds to midnight. This is you might be familiar with the clock. We often talk about time. How much time do we have left? A lot of the discussion we have around climate change is about time, achieving time within targets. Strange things are happening to our sense of time. Not only do we face the potential loss of the past and this issue of triage, what do we save and what do we lose? For many young people, when you ask them about the future is dark. They have a deep anxiety about the future. People have lost any sense of what happens in the future, of where we're going, of where, and the sense of people's timelines is shifting in all kinds of ways which are hard to understand or predict. But I'm just saying time is shifting in complex ways, how we perceive it. Also, attention, what we pay attention to in the present, in the future, and the past is shifting. And this is the next thing I want to draw on. This issue of attention is key to climate change. Isn't that a great photo? In my work on the psychology of climate change, it is clear that a lot of the issues regarding this is about the boundaries of attention. The capacity for us to define what we pay attention to and what we do not. We do not pay attention to climate change because it does not contain the things which trigger our attention. Here, now, enemy, these issues. But also we actively place it outside the area towards which we are prepared to pay attention. The bounds of attention are very wide. What can we talk about? Where are we for time? What do we remember and what do we choose to forget? All of these are in play. What is here and there? Is this my here? Is that my here? Am I part of a global humanity? Or am I going to define my boundary here? Who is my tribe? Who is part of me and who is them? And where is the dividing line between them? What is true and what is false? We live in a world of climate denial. I have the dubious privilege of being the first person to ever use the phrase climate denier in print. And I'm the kind of the father of climate denier as a concept. And there's so much falsehood. Where we draw the lines, I think, as we move forward, especially towards 2050, this issue between what is true and what is false, where we draw the lines, how we define what is me and what is them, what will I engage with or not, becomes absolutely fundamental to our responses. I believe very strongly we will contract our definitions. Who is me, who I care about, who is important will become more and more and more limited as we go into a defense mode. And what I protect will become smaller and smaller and smaller. Our definitions will contract. When I say we, have to be careful. Who is the we here? Is it all of humanity? Is it just us? I tend to say we, particularly in terms of a privileged world, the rich world. We need to be very careful with the we's. But this issue, this final one, what is now in some circles, in some theoretical circles called necropolitics. Who will be saved and who will be sacrificed? We are moving into a world where we are preparing ourselves for a sacrifice, as you saw from that devastating work by Yo and Tim Lenton and so on, that a third of the world are living in areas which are going to be sacrificed. There are some decisions there that are being made without naming them as decisions. That is very dangerous when you do things without being conscious of the decision that you're making. We're making decisions already now, and we're already preparing ourselves, I believe, in the discussion we currently have about migration, for future migration, so that we can line up the sense of where the lines are drawn between what is saved and what is lost already in advance. We're suffering in a way from a plague of distraction. It is a very, very unfortunate, but maybe not coincidental, historical fact that billions are being invested in the technologies of distraction at exactly the time that we have a lot of things we do not want to pay attention to. These two things go together. Part of the reason I think why young people are so drawn into this world is because there's so many things that they don't want to pay attention to in the external world. These two things are working together. And I think we're moving into a future of distraction. Again, what you have to offer in terms of the understanding of attentiveness is so critical for where we move forward. And then we move forward into this issue of blame. By mid-century, people will be saying, who is responsible for this? Who do we blame? This, in this case, is Greta being blamed for climate policy in Germany that people feel has hurt their lives, because the blame cuts in lots of different directions. There's a lot of anger and resistance against climate policy because people say, no, why should I do it when you're not doing it? This isn't fair. I don't even believe in the problem. Blame historically has often been associated with climate change. The witch hunts which went through Bohemia in the 17th century were all related to a form of climate change, probably from volcanic eruptions. The witches were directly accused of climate magic, but they had changed and altered the climate. So this sense of when you have an external geophysical impact, to find a direct person to blame is utterly built into a way that humans make sense of climate change. And don't think this is in the past. During the Assam floods in 2022, an entire conspiracy theory erupted amongst the Hindu population of Assam, but the flooding of their lands was created by the Muslim minority who had broken down the flood barriers in order to flood their lands. And this was the language here that was being used in the media by senior politicians, and across social media, the meme #FloodJihad started spreading. So climate change and the blame and who is responsible, the anger, the grief that people feel, will be looking for targets which will fall down the lines of existing socially defined targets. We will, something funny's happened at the top of the screen. We will also be trying to protect and defend our own sense of our moral identity in the midst of this, sanctifying ourselves. A process that Bandura calls moral cleansing. I'm good, I'm pure, this isn't my fault, I'm not responsible for this, it's that person over there, that person there. So as we move forward, I think all of us, we all do this anyway, this is part of who we are. We'll be seeking to protect and defend our own moral integrity in a situation which is highly morally charged. And I think this moral licensing is particularly powerful. This, by the way, on a flight I took on the speaking tour, this is a recycled plastic cup for United Airlines Eco Skies project. I had a whole interaction with them on Twitter about their wretched cups. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. This is not just greenwash. This is, I don't seem to have the thing up there. The moral licensing is where you do a little good thing over there and you say, that makes me a good person. That's my good deed. And you then use that as and Bandura call it kind of internal trading, where you say, well, that good thing over there, that is something which I can trade against that bad thing over there. And we all do this all the time. It's going to become particularly powerful. It's a form of distraction. People will say, I have my recycled bag, or I do my right thing, or I do my right thing, and they'll be seeking to cleanse themselves of responsibility moving forward. There will be a lot of this. The language, I think, a famous piece of research done on the morality of delinquents came up with these kind of 4 processes by which people processed it. And this is already very present in the conversation on climate change. I didn't do it. The thing which is happening out there, it's not such a big deal. We can cope with it. That person over there, they're not really hurt. They're just complaining about it. And anyway, they had it coming to them. And don't tell me that I'm bad because I don't trust you and that you've got no right to tell me. This is all in play. And I think the language of criminality is powerful, suitable enough here. The language of criminality is powerful enough to transfer to the way we respond to climate change, because it is a crime not defined as a crime. Increasing language, and I think moving forward, of people looking for religion and religious responses to this issue. It's a greater than self struggle for which people will be looking for a greater than self solution. I would predict strongly that people will be looking for faith-based answers that may not be spiritual, that may be in the form of evangelical faiths which cross over strongly with politics. It may be in the sense of mass movements, mass political movements. This has always been the way in the past where people have responded. And religiosity, in this sense, is not just about religions, it is also about political movements. I would tend to predict that as we move forward with this, many young people will be drawn into radical political movements. This sense that in a situation where as a little individual you feel a sense of despair, you can find a sense of strength from mass mobilization. That's a powerful force for change. It can also be a powerful force for harm and for evil as well. A lot of harm has been caused by people in mass movements. And so I think that urge will be there. And finally, people respond with a sense of what I would call double down. And we've already seen that in terms of how we're responding to climate change. You know, this is what the International Energy Agency we heard about, what OPEC, what the United States seems to think is going to happen. You saw the charts for how much we need to reduce. This is what they think is going to happen. Basically, all of the things causing climate change are going to keep increasing as we move forward. This is so doubling down is saying doubling down. There's a lot of names for doubling down, but belief perseverance will be one of them. When people are confronted, their worldview, their values are challenged, but their response is to say, I don't believe you, and I'm going to do more of it. It's the behavior of an alcoholic, for example, confronted on their drinking, who says, I don't have a problem drinking. Look, I can drink even more. It doesn't do me any harm. It is a human response when your worldview and your values and identity becomes challenged, that you reinvest in it rather than questioning it and moving away. Like this, believe it or not, was from the cover of a Guardian travel supplement. Time is coming out and you can't quite see it. 30 places you need to see whilst you still can. Oh, by the way, this kind of climate change tourism is big at the moment. There's an awful lot of cruises to the Arctic and see things whilst you still can. People say it in these terms. They say, I want to see it whilst still. I want to see the coral reefs whilst they're still there. I think this relates strongly to the problems with the four attachments. I think my superficial understanding of Buddhism suggests that the attachments relate very strongly and directly to this issue of what I would say doubling down, of going deeper into the very thing which is causing the problem, even to the point of glorifying high carbon lifestyles, of aggressively doing even more of it. This, by the way, is a thing they have for some communities in the States called rolling coal, where you rig up your truck to produce huge clouds of black smoke. And it is an act of defiance against climate change. And what you do is you have a little button on your thing, you pull up alongside a cyclist, and you just press a button. Look online for rolling coal. There's a lot of videos of this. So moving forward, sorry, I've gone over time. I'll wind up quickly. Moving forward, we've got to have, I think, narratives that are more compelling and speak more effectively to people's identity, and are more widely shared than the other ones. There's a struggle of the stories going on. Some stories rise, some stories fall. I believe we are driven by story, and we need narratives that are powerful and compelling and positive. We're all part of what is happening. We have to be open, and we have to prevent this tendency to demarcate and say these lines between one thing and another. Yeah, we as us and them. We are both the heroes and the enemies. Time is past, present, and future. Space is here and there, because these boundaries are already starting to come up. And we've already heard Joanna Macy. I love Joanna Macy. I've met her many times. She's a big inspiration for me. It is a privilege to be alive at this time when we can choose to take part in the self-healing of our world. Out of this darkness, a new world can arise, not to be constructed by our minds so much, as to emerge from our dreams. And the final thought I'd leave you is this. I did a lot of work in Calgary in Alberta, an oil-dependent community. The way people there talk about climate change, I'm sorry, something funny has happened to my slide, is through the sense of community, but through facing climate impacts, they come together, they show their humanity, they care, they love for each other in a way that this is a place where you can't talk in the same way about climate change, about blame, because everybody in some way is involved with the oil industry. But you can talk about how through this we can find our humanity. I think that's one of the big opportunities. Thank you.